At this point, we have achieved all our primary forms, and from now on, it's just a polishing process to get across the finish line. And this will probably be the longest video, not because it's the hardest part of the workflow, but because it requires the most discipline and patience. So let's get back to the face. There's a lot of pressure on the face, being that it has the most detail, so I want to make sure these forms are good and polished. And I left the eye in a less than satisfactory state. So I've taken a break. It's several days later, and I can approach it with fresh eyes and have a much better idea about what to do. So the bottom lid here has been pulled away from the eyeball. So I'm going to shrink that gap. And then I started a very rough lower eyelid shape and never really completed it. So I'm going to work on completing that. First, I want to start with a better silhouette. You can see it's very bumpy. It's going to go better for me if I kind of polish that off first, make it a nice contour. You're going to hear me say that a lot. Smooth, strong contours are very important. And then I'm going to build up the eyelid structure using the crease brush with the Shift-C hotkey. And also, I want to make sure my dynamic topology settings are set to subdivide edges. And I'm also going to take the detail size down to 5. This will give me dense enough geometry to capture strong, sharp details, like the ridge of the bottom eyelid. All right, so I'm pushing out, creating a shelf as I trace along the bottom eye. There's going to be a lot of smoothing as well. So I created the shelf, and now I'm going to smooth on both sides of that shelf. That's going to help reinforce the final version of this shape. You'll see me do that a lot with crease. All right, so we need another strong crease, but pushed inward on the bottom. And I kind of started that. Now I'm just going to finish it up. So crease first, and then we'll grab the pinch brush with the P hotkey and pinch that up nice and tight. And then, kind of smooth outside of it. There we go. So the shape and structure is good, but notice how wavy the contour is. This is why it's very important to be mindful of the contours, because one of the most difficult things about sculpting in real life and in the computer is that things can get bumpy and wobbly really quick. Now, it's never going to be perfect, and so we have to be okay with that, but as long as we're disciplined, we can make it pretty good to the average eye. Now, it's important also to look from every angle. So even if this contour looks good from one side, if I look from the top, yikes, it's very wobbly and it's not a consistent thickness. And look at this, it's completely far away from the eyeball. I'm going to tighten up this section. All the edits I've done kind of softened the hard edge. It's just this exercise of accidentally smooth that a little too much. It's this exercise of the polishing process where I have to make changes close up to the mesh, but not forget that the real standard is how it looks from far away. Okay, I think that's pretty good for the lower eyelid. Feels nice and polished. It's not perfect. It's got a little bit of waviness or bumpiness in it. Flat spots. Okay, that's feeling better now. All right, let's move to the upper brow. And now that I've polished the lower eyelid, we can see a pretty big distance between the surface quality, whereas the top brow has very broad geometry and the lower eyelid is very smooth, and you can't really tell that it's a dynamic topology sculpture. And so another thing you'll see me do a lot in the areas that I'm polishing is I'll use the inflate brush at a low strength and just lightly touch around the surface. And you won't see anything happening, but really what I'm doing is just updating the geometry. And then when I smooth it, hold shift, we'll see a much finer topology take over, a much finer mesh density. And this is kind of prepping the surface for, a polishing pass. All right, so I didn't love how the brow turned out. A couple things is this crease is very, very broad and kind of ugly. So I'm gonna use the crease brush now that we have a lot more geometry to polish this off, tighten it up. And so I've used the crease to kind of push it inward. And now I'm gonna use the inflate brush to kind of puff it out. Again, that's a pretty low strength. Maybe increase it a little bit. Smoothed out. Okay, that's looking a lot better. Okay, let's polish off the lower brow. You know, it looks pretty tight, all things considered, on the bottom side. So I'm going to pinch that ridge a little bit, smooth on the bottom. Then I also want to fade out the ridge as we kind of leave the brow area. All right, that's looking a lot better. It's kind of this point right here that I don't love. All right, I think that's pretty good. All right, let's move down here into the cheek. We've got started on this shape, but there's a lot more that we can do. I'm going to use the draw sharp here. Actually, first, that inflate trick at a low strength, just kind of up-res the topology here. So I've touched it lightly, and now I'm smoothing. We have way more topology to work with. And, you know, as we make strokes, the topology will update, but I find that if I do that early, then I'll avoid some of the ugly pinching and bumpiness that can happen with dynamic topology sculpting. And so I'm prepping the surface, and now I'll use the draw sharp instead of the crease. So the crease brush, I find it struggles to really push inward to the surface, and draw sharp, though it has less pinching, is better for, you know, really pushing the surface in deep. And that's what I want to happen here in the corner of the mouth. I really want this to be a deep crevice, so that from the outside, you can't really tell that it's there at all. It's kind of tucked away under the cheek. Still using the draw sharp. Let's now smooth out the shapes we've made. Inflate. Whenever we're dealing with, you know, deep crevices like this, inflate does so much to just tighten them up to a final state. Over to the crease brush now, because I'm not so interested in pushing down too deep, but I want that pinching effect. All right, so just pushing in the crease, smoothing out the surfaces around it. Maybe I do need a little bit of draw sharp to push down, and then the inflate to kind of puff up. There we go, that's looking a lot tighter. And then follow that around back into the corner of the mouth. Inflate to make it nice and sharp. Okay, that's looking so much better. Now it's just a matter of making it match the shape in the artwork. So it comes to a much finer point in the art. Use the grab brush to push and pull this shape around. Maybe it's not quite polished enough on the bottom. If I move those shapes around and they're not equally polished, then it's going to look bumpy and funky. So let's take the draw sharp and just finish out this shape, this contour, into the rest of the mouth. And though that looks pretty bumpy, when we take the inflate brush, it's going to look a lot better. Well, it looks tighter, but we got to address the wobbliness. And the wobble is, I don't know, it's making me nervous a little bit in here, because I wondered if I had too high of a topology density, and that was making my job harder, but I think we've gotten away with it. That is something to keep out for. If your topology gets too dense too quick, then you'll end up with a very bumpy mess. All right, so I'm moving to the lip just a little bit as I kind of spread out the polishing pass. And again, I'm just lightly touching the lip. Nothing's really changing until I hold the shift brush and smooth that out. Now it is so much smoother, and I think I can go back and finalize this cheek shape. Now, junctions like this, where we have the mouth and the cheek and this very dense crevice kind of forming together, can be tricky for certain. So if you're struggling with this area, any sculptor can relate. But that's also why I'm trying to tuck as much of it into the cheek as possible, so that the contour that overhangs covers, you know, any kind of funkiness going on in here. And so we're at a pretty good spot, unless we're, you know, the viewer is looking at this at a very intense angle. I think we're in good shape. If I use the inflate brush to kind of puff that out, there we go. The contour looks pretty nice at this point. And it's maybe a little bit chunkier than what we see in the artwork. So a little bit of grab brush pushing around, and I think we're good. I just want to make sure that this shape kind of smooths out well into the body. Looks like if we turn on our wireframe, yeah, we can kind of see where the dense polygons become broader. And so I'm going to turn off wireframe and switch to subdivide collapse. All right, so this will regenerate all the topology, which I find when you see these kind of sharp edges, even though we're smoothing and it's not ever getting better, that's a topology issue. And so if I jump to the inflate brush, low strength, and regenerate this topology, you want to be careful not to touch anywhere up there. We don't want that to happen and ruin all our details. So I'm just being careful where I regenerate the topology. And now when I smooth, that goes away. All right, so we can use that regeneration of topology to smooth a lot of these pinches that you'll run into. All right, so I'm going to follow the lip now and just make sure that I want to switch back to subdivide edges. Before I forget, it can be easy to forget that. And then your creases, you'll notice that you forgot it when your creases are not tightening properly. Let's increase the strength a bit more. Another reason I use inflate to kind of regenerate the topology before I start polishing is because the smooth brush, which is the second step, kind of shrinks the volume inherently. And so to offset that, I use inflate to puff it out. And then the two of them combined ends up with a pretty consistent result rather than a decreased volume version of the surface. All right, so I want to kind of inflate in between. Let's increase the strength a bit more. Inflate the meat around the teeth a bit. There we go, that's feeling better. Smooth it out. Yeah, I'm gonna do that all the way around. Push in a little bit to this tooth because it doesn't look like it's pressed against the lip very much. Okay, that's looking good. However, the contour now is bumpy because those two things, the pressing of the lip meat and this sharp stylized contour can sort of fight each other. And so the last thing I want to do is make sure, once I got the meat pressing effect implemented, I want to come back to the outside and adjust the contour to be nice and smooth. This is where the tedious kind of patience and discipline comes in. Because if we don't do this, we'll end up at a more like realistic interpretation of the shark. But that is not what the art is about. And so being mindful of the contours is super important with stylistic sculpting. All right, I'm gonna actually, since there's no sharp details over here, I'm getting that kind of topology pinching wobbliness. And so if I switch over to subdivide collapse and do that same kind of regenerate the topology with the inflate brush and smooth it out, it should take care of most of that wobbliness. Now, again, it's never going to be completely perfect. We are sculpting, and even, real clay sculptures are not perfect. They have this handmade kind of quality. So perfection is not the goal. Oh, that's going to help a lot. Look at this. So it looks good from this angle, but I'm still detecting like it's not completely consistent and smooth. And then we look from an upper angle and we can see very evidently that it's not the same thickness everywhere. All right, that's looking a lot better now. In the artwork, we have this very sharp line under the front part of the lip. And so I'm going to, let's see, switch back to subdivide edges, use my crease brush and just tighten this up, holding control. Remember, I like to set this to plus. Probably said that 10 times in this course already. All right, so we've used the crease brush. I'm gonna smooth out around it. Use the P pinch brush. Just tighten that up. Maybe tighten all the way down to a degree. All right, that looks better. Maybe a little bit more creasing. All right, so that looks good, but there's some bumpiness down here, and I want that to be smoothed out. So you should know by now we switch to subdivide collapse. I use a very low strength inflate brush. Going to regenerate the topology, lightly touching, and then hold shift to smooth. And I find that is a very effective way. You should see, even though this is subtle, those things are gone for the most part. All right, let's move on to the nose and, actually the teeth while I'm thinking about it. Let's set up a mirror modifier for every tooth except the middle one. All right, so I've got all them selected, and I'm going to, let's see here, add a generate mirror modifier. And we're going to select the body, Sculpt Shark. Since it has a central object origin that's allowing us to sculpt symmetrically, we can trust that it will mirror symmetrically as well. And so that active tooth has been mirrored. We just need to click the drop down and copy to selected. And now we've got teeth on both sides. Excellent. So let's go to the nose and polish that off a little bit. I'm pretty happy with the shapes we achieved there, but the geometry is a little too broad compared to the other areas that we've polished. So inflate brush, I'm going to use subdivide edges to keep our creases tight. Eye to inflate, let's rebuild the geometry there, smooth it out. And then we'll just tighten the creases a bit with the crease brush, or the typical process of crease. It's either crease, pinch, inflate, or sometimes just pinch and inflate, or sometimes just crease and inflate. But whatever combination is appropriate, ending on a inflate stroke usually ends up really nice. Very tight crease. And then a strong inflate brush on the inside just to push out that nostril, the interior nostril a bit more. Remember, that's if we have lighting, that's going to cast a very dark shadow in there, which is ideal. Then just smooth it out so we don't see any of that broad topology. There's also a tight crease here that we can finesse a bit more. So crease brush, inflate brush, and I think that's probably pretty good. Maybe take the crease into the nostril slightly. From far away, I think that registers. I'm happy. Let's move on. Let's remesh this area, just lightly touching with an inflate brush, smoothing it out. And this crease definitely needs some new topology. Now it's a lot smoother. And then it should just be a typical crease polishing process. It's worth saying that at the horizon of symmetry, sometimes it can end up looking a little bit different just because, it's that dynamic of having double the effect of your brush right there, because that the mirrored cursor crossing the horizon of symmetry can either double the effect. And I find that since I'm used to that, I will avoid or try and feather out my stroke towards the horizon of symmetry, and then it ends up not being as strong as everywhere else. So just, you'll figure it out on your own, but the horizon of symmetry can be a little bit tricky to, or a little bit different than everywhere else. All right, that's pretty good for a polished crease. There we go, nice and tight. And I think that means our face is complete and polished. Just one little area to kind of work out. Didn't love how that looked. Maybe touch some of this lightly and then smooth it out. I think that feels pretty nice. All right, yikes, that was like 26 minutes according to my OBS window. So yeah, definitely the longest video, but that's the hardest part done, is polishing off the face where all of this shark's personality exists. And so now it's just a matter of polishing off the other areas like the fins. And in fact, I think I'll do that last and just stop the video here for viewing convenience.